The sun was a hammer, and the sky was an anvil, and the day was a piece of metal beaten flat and hot. It was the kind of heat that baked the breath right out of your lungs, the kind that made the dust on the road rise up in ghosts. A boy was running through it. He was maybe 6 years old, but his eyes were 100. His feet were bare and blistered, kicking up puffs of dirt that stuck to the sweat on his ankles. He didn't carry a toy, didn't carry a water skin. He carried a terror so big it threatened to swallow him whole. He was running toward a cabin that stood alone, hunched under a cottonwood tree like an old man hiding from the sun. People didn't go to this cabin. They walked a wide circle around it. They whispered about the man who lived inside. But the boy didn't have a choice. He reached the warped wooden door and his small fist rose. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was too small for the silence. He hit it again, harder, putting all his fear into it. Inside, a chair scraped across a wooden floor. The sound was slow, heavy. The door didn't open. It groaned, like a beast waking from a long sleep. And in the darkness of the doorway, a man appeared. He wasn't just a man. He was a mountain. Tall, wide, with a beard so wild it looked like a bird could nest in it. His skin was leather, scarred by sun and stories nobody dared to ask about. His eyes were the color of storm clouds over a granite peak. Those eyes looked down at the boy, and they didn't hold pity. They didn't hold kindness. They just held a stillness that was more frightening than a shout. The boy's lip trembled, but he forced his chin up. He had practiced the words all the way here, a desperate prayer in the dust. "They beaten my mama," he gasped, the words cracking. "She's dyin'." The mountain of a man didn't move. His hand, covered in knuckles like white stones, rested on the doorframe. He could have shut the door. He could have turned the boy away and let the silence swallow his words. Most men would have, but this was not most men. He leaned forward, and his shadow fell over the boy, a cool patch in the burning day. When he finally spoke, his voice was like rocks grinding together, deep and low. "Show me." The boy didn't need to be told twice. He spun and ran, his little legs churning. The man followed, and the ground shook with every step of his heavy boots. They passed leaning fences and dry wells, a world that seemed to be dying of thirst. They came to a shack that looked like one good wind would turn it to splinters. The boy burst inside. The man had to duck to get through the door. The air in the shack was thick. It smelled of dust and fear and the faint coppery tang of blood. On a cot in the corner, a woman lay still. Her face was a canvas of bruises, her lips split. Her breath was a tiny, shallow thing, a bird with a broken wing. But when the boy touched her hand, her eyes flickered open, and in their depths, something was still fighting. A spark. She saw the giant figure filling the doorway of her broken home, and her eyes filled with a weary suspicion. She had no trust left to give. The man knelt beside the cot. For someone so large, his movements were surprisingly gentle. He dipped a rag in a bucket of water and touched it to her lips. She flinched, but she didn't turn away. The boy's voice was a shaky whisper. "He's gonna help, Mama." The man's gray eyes scanned the room. An overturned chair. A boot print ground into the floorboards, deeper than any normal man would make. Broken glass in the corner. He didn't need her story. Cruelty wrote its own signature. But as his eyes swept the room, they stopped. Tucked under the edge of the cot, almost hidden, was something small and glinting. It wasn't broken glass. It was a cufflink. Made of silver, with a strange design etched into it. The design of a coiled snake. He'd seen that snake before. A long time ago. The man said nothing. He simply reached down, his huge fingers surprisingly nimble, and palmed the piece of metal. He tucked it away in his pocket as if it were a common stone. He patched the broken window, cleaned the woman's wounds, and moved with a silent purpose that seemed to push back the shadows. The boy watched him, his fear slowly being replaced by a fragile awe. Outside, the town watched too. A neighbor woman walked by, her eyes sharp and mean. "Trouble follows trouble," she muttered, loud enough for the wind to carry. The preacher came next, his words all about sin and forgiveness, but his hands were empty. He offered no help, only judgment. When he suggested her suffering was a lesson in humility, the giant's silence was so loud, so heavy, that the preacher stammered and fled. That night, the man sat by the door, whittling a piece of wood. The blade of his knife caught the lamplight. He wasn't just whittling, he was waiting, because he knew. That silver cufflink wasn't a mistake, it was a message. And the men who sent it would be coming back. Days bled into one another, thick and slow like molasses. The woman whose name the boy whispered was Alara began to heal. The bruises on her face faded from a violent purple to a sickly yellow, then disappeared altogether. Her strength returned, a little trickle at first, then a slow-moving stream. She watched the giant. He never asked about the men. He never asked how she got her scars. He just chopped wood, fixed the leaky roof, and stood like a silent guardian between her and the world. His name, she learned from the boy, was Cain. It was a name that fit him, a name branded with a story. The boy, Leo, started to orbit him like a small moon. He'd follow Cain to the well, mimic the way he swung the axe. A sliver of a smile would sometimes touch Cain's lips, a rare thing, like finding a flower growing from a rock. One afternoon, he lifted Leo onto his big horse. The boy's laughter, bright and clear, filled the air. It was a sound that Shaq hadn't heard in a long, long time, but that sound traveled. It carried on the wind into town, through the swinging doors of the saloon. Inside, men were drinking. Their voices were low, their laughter sharp as broken glass. The man with the scar on his jaw, the one they called Jebediah, slammed his mug on the table. "She should have stayed broken," he snarled, "and that mountain freak has no business there." Another man, his eyes beady, nodded. "It ain't finished. Richter wants it finished." Jebediah grinned, a cruel slash in his face. "Richter will get what he wants." He ran a thumb over his scar. "And I'll get what I want." Back at the shack, Alara was watching Cain split logs. The rhythmic thud of the axe was becoming a comfort, the sound of safety. She finally found her voice, a little rusty from disuse. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you helping us?" Cain stopped, the axe resting on the block. He looked out at the horizon, at the blood-red sunset. "Because no one helped me," he said, his voice so low it was almost carried away by the wind. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. In those 4 words, she heard a history of pain that mirrored her own. Later that night, as Leo slept, Alara found the strength to sit up. She watched Cain by the door, the silver cufflink now sitting on the table beside him, catching the lamplight. He would pick it up, turn it over in his fingers, his expression unreadable. "That snake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's Richter's mark." Cain looked at her, his gray eyes piercing the gloom. He didn't seem surprised. "I know." A new fear, colder than the first, gripped her. This wasn't about a few angry drunks. This was about the man who owned the town, the valley, and everything in it. Hiram Richter. A man whose name was only ever spoken in hushed tones. "He thinks I have it," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "My husband. He found something. Proof. Of all the land Richter stole, the families he ruined. Before he died, he told me he hid it." "And did he tell you where?" Cain's voice was calm, steady, a rock in the middle of her terror. She shook her head, sobbing quietly. "No. He was killed before he could. Jebediah and his men. They think I know. They keep coming back, tearing the place apart." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "They will kill me. They'll kill my son. Cain stood up. He walked over to the cot, his huge frame blotting out the lamplight. He looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than stillness in his eyes. She saw a fire, a slow-burning rage that had been banked for years. "My husband was a good man," she whispered. "He was the town's blacksmith. He tried to stand up to Richter." Cain's jaw tightened. "The blacksmith," he said, more to himself than to her. "The one they said was killed in a hunting accident." Alara nodded, her face a mask of grief. Cain looked from her to the sleeping boy, then back to the cufflink on the table. The snake seemed to mock him from its silver prison. Richter, Jebediah, the names from his past, ghosts he thought he had buried, were now standing on his doorstep. He knew what was coming. It wasn't just a fight anymore. It was a war, and it had just found him again. The next afternoon, the heat was a physical weight. The cicadas buzzed in a frantic, nervous rhythm, as if they knew a storm was coming. Leo came running from the well, his face pale with panic. "Mama, they're comin'!" he cried. "I heard 'em in town! Jebediah and all his men! They're coming to finish it!" Alara's blood ran cold. She looked at Cain, who was sharpening his axe, the shing 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 of stone on steel a grim heartbeat in the suffocating silence. He didn't look up. He just kept sharpening. "You don't have to fight for us," she whispered, her voice thick with despair. "You can leave. No one would blame you." Cain finally stopped. He tested the edge of the axe with his thumb. He looked at her, his eyes like chips of flint. "There are some fights you don't choose," he said, his voice flat. "They choose you." Then they heard it. The thunder of hooves. A cloud of dust on the horizon, growing bigger, angrier. 5 riders coming hard. Their laughter was a raw, ugly sound that tore through the quiet afternoon. Cain walked outside. He didn't take the axe. He just stood there, his arms loose at his sides, planting his feet in the dirt as if he were taking root. The riders reined in, their horses kicking up dust that coated everything. Jebediah sat in the lead, a cruel smirk on his scarred face. "Well, look what we have here," he sneered, his eyes flicking from Cain to the shack. "The broken bird got herself a big old guard dog." He spat in the dust. "We came for what's ours, freak. Richter's property. Step aside." Cain didn't move. He was a statue of defiance. "I said, step aside." Jebediah's voice cracked like a whip. Before Cain could answer, Leo burst out of the cabin, planting his small body in front of the giant. "You can't hurt my mama again," he screamed, his voice thin but fierce. The men laughed, a nasty, brutal sound. "Little pup's got teeth," one of them chuckled. Jebediah's smirk vanished. His eyes narrowed, locking on Cain. And then he said the name no one in this valley had spoken in 10 years. "This ain't your business, Abel." The world seemed to stop. Alara, watching from the window, gasped. "Abel?" She looked from Cain's stoic face to Jebediah's scarred sneer. The same dark hair, the same set of the jaw. It was impossible, but it was true. They were brothers. Cain's face was stone. "Her name is Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And this is her home. You're not welcome here, Jebediah." "I ain't asking," Jebediah snarled and dismounted. He started to circle like a wolf sizing up a bear. "Richter's tired of waiting. He wants the ledger. Give it to us, and we'll let the woman and the brat live." "There is no ledger," Cain said, his voice dangerously even. "Liar!" Jebediah lunged. The fight exploded in a storm of dust and violence. It wasn't a brawl. It was a reckoning. The other 4 men jumped in, but it was clear this was between the 2 brothers. Every blow was weighted with a decade of hatred and betrayal. Cain moved with a brutal economy, his fists like sledgehammers. He wasn't just fighting men. He was fighting ghosts. He dropped one man with a single punch. Another came at him with a bottle, and Kane took the blow on his shoulder, the glass shattering, blood welling up dark and thick. He didn't even flinch. He just grabbed the man and threw him into another, sending them both tumbling into the dust. But Jebediah was different. He was fueled by a furious personal rage. He fought dirty, a knife appearing in his hand. He slashed at Kane, who twisted away, the blade slicing open his ribs. Kane roared, a sound of pure agony and fury, and backhanded Jebediah so hard the man flew backwards and hit the ground. The dust began to settle. 4 men were groaning on the ground. Only Jebediah was getting back to his feet, wiping blood from his mouth. He looked at his brother, his eyes burning with a venomous fire. "This ain't over," he spat, his voice a raw whisper. He grabbed his fallen men, hauled them onto their horses, and they galloped away, leaving a trail of dust and threats hanging in the air. Silence descended. Kane stood panting, blood dripping from his arm and side. Leo ran to him, clinging to his leg, his small body trembling. Alara rushed out, her hands fluttering helplessly near his wounds. "Abel," she breathed, the name feeling strange on her tongue. He looked at her, his storm gray eyes filled with a pain that had nothing to do with the gashes in his skin. "He called you Abel," she said, her mind reeling. Kane, whose real name was Abel, nodded grimly. He looked down at his own hands, now stained with his own blood, and for the first time, Alara understood the true weight of the name he had chosen for his exile. Kane, the brother who was marked. But what she didn't realize, what even Abel didn't realize, was that Jebediah hadn't just come for a ledger. He had left something behind, a warning. Tied to the fence post, flapping in the hot breeze, was a small strip of black cloth. In this valley, a black cloth on your fence meant only one thing. It was Richter's mark of condemnation. It meant you were no longer just an obstacle. You were a target, and the hunt was about to begin. That night, the shack was a fortress of pain and silence. Alara cleaned Abel's wounds with trembling hands. The gash on his ribs was deep. The cut on his shoulder was ragged. He bore the pain without a sound, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on some distant point only he could see. "You were brothers," she said, not a question, but a statement of disbelief. He finally looked at her. "He chose his path. I chose mine." The story came out in broken pieces, like shards of glass. They had both been deputies, young, ambitious. But the sheriff was in Richter's pocket. When an order came down to burn a homesteader off his land, Abel refused. Jebediah, eager to please, eager for power, led the raid himself. Abel tried to stop him. In the fight, Jebediah got his scar. And Abel got a choice: leave the valley forever, or be buried in it. He chose to leave his name, his family, his life, and become Kane, the outcast. A man living in a self-imposed prison just miles from the life he'd lost. "He thinks I came back for revenge," Abel said, his voice raspy. "He doesn't understand that I came here to be left alone." "You're not alone now," Alara whispered, tying off a bandage. His gaze softened for a moment. He looked at Leo, sleeping fitfully on the cot, his small face still streaked with tears. "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." The conversation had shifted something between them. The wall of silence had been breached. She now knew his real name. He now knew her real fear. They were no longer a stranger and a victim. They were 2 broken people trying to shield a small boy from a storm. "The ledger," Abel said, his focus returning. "It's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that can stop him." "But I don't know where it is," she cried in frustration. "My husband Daniel, he was so clever. He loved riddles. He just said." "The horse knows the way." Abel frowned. "The horse? We had a horse, old Pete, but Daniel sold him a week before he died, to pay for supplies. A dead end. The one clue they had was gone. The hope that had flickered in the room seemed to die. But Leo, who had been pretending to be asleep, sat up. His eyes were wide. "No, Mama," he said, his voice small. "The horse knows the way. Papa said it to me too." Leo scrambled off the cot. He went to a dusty corner of the room and picked up his only toy. A small wooden horse, its paint chipped, one of its legs wobbly. It had been carved by his father. "The horse knows the way," Leo repeated, holding it out. Abel and Alara stared at the toy. It was impossible. It was a child's fantasy. But Daniel was a blacksmith. A man who worked with his hands. A man who loved riddles. Abel took the horse. It was heavier than it should have been. He turned it over. Along the belly, nearly invisible, was a seam. He took out his whittling knife, inserted the tip, and twisted. The wood split open. Inside, nestled in a hollowed-out compartment, was a small, leather-bound book. The ledger. Relief washed over them, so powerful it was dizzying. But it was short-lived. A floorboard creaked outside the front door. Abel put a finger to his lips, his eyes instantly alert. He blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He grabbed his axe and moved to the door, silent as a ghost. Alara held her breath, clutching Leo so tightly he whimpered. The latch on the door rattled. Then a low chuckle from outside. It was Jebediah's voice. "You can't hide, brother," he called out, his voice laced with a sick amusement. "Richter wants to see the book, and he sent me with a message. We know you have it now." Another sound joined his voice, the glugging sound of liquid being poured. The sharp, acrid smell of kerosene began to seep under the door. "Give us the ledger, Abel." Jebediah's voice was cold now, all trace of amusement gone. "Or we'll burn it, and you, and them, all the way to hell." Outside, a match scraped. A tiny flare of light appeared in the crack beneath the door. They weren't trapped in a shack anymore. They were trapped in a tinderbox. And the devil was outside, ready to light the fuse. The first lick of flame shot up the door frame, orange and hungry. Smoke began to curl into the cabin, thin wisps that smelled of death. "The cellar!" Alara gasped, pointing to a trap door under a threadbare rug. "Daniel dug it! It comes out by the creek." Abel didn't hesitate. He ripped the rug aside and wrenched the door open. A wave of cool, earthy air washed over them. "Go!" he commanded. "Take the boy and the book. Run and don't look back." "What about you?" she cried, her face illuminated by the growing fire. "Jebediah came for me," he said, his eyes hard as diamonds. "A family matter." He pushed her toward the opening. "Go!" Alara scrambled into the darkness, pulling Leo with her. She looked back one last time and saw him, a giant silhouette against the fire, axe in hand. He wasn't Cain anymore. He was Abel, the brother who was about to face his own. He kicked the front door open, splintering the burning wood. He stepped out into a nightmare. The entire front of the shack was engulfed in flames. Jebediah and 3 other men stood watching, their faces demonic in the flickering light. "Finally decided to come out and play?" Jebediah sneered. "This is between us, Jeb," Abel said, his voice a low growl. "Let them go." "Too late for that," Jebediah laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. "Richter pays for a clean sweep." He lunged, and the final battle began. It wasn't a fight. It was a war waged in the heart of an inferno. The heat was scorching, the smoke thick enough to choke on. Abel fought with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose, his axe a blur of deadly motion. He was wounded and outnumbered, but he was driven by a righteous fury that had been dormant for a decade. Meanwhile, in the darkness of the tunnel, Alara could hear the sounds of the fight above. She could hear the roar of the fire. She clutched the ledger to her chest and ran, pulling Leo along, tears streaming down her face. She emerged by the creek bed, gasping for air, the orange glow of the fire painting the sky. She should have kept running. That's what Abel told her to do. But as she looked at the ledger in her hands, the proof of Richter's evil, she knew she couldn't. Running hadn't saved her husband. It wouldn't save Abel. It wouldn't save her son from a life of looking over his shoulder. The town had let this happen. The preacher with his empty words, the neighbor with her venomous whispers, the sheriff with his paid-off badge. They had all stood by and watched Richter poison their home. "Mama, what are you doing?" Leo whimpered as she turned, not toward the safety of the wilderness, but back toward the town. "I'm finishing the story, baby," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. She started walking, then running, not away from the fire, but toward a different kind of light. The one that hung in the church steeple. Back at the shack, Abel was weakening. A knife wound in his leg had him stumbling. His vision was blurring from the smoke. Jebediah saw his chance. He kicked the axe from Abel's hand and tackled him to the ground, his thumbs gouging for his brother's eyes. "I should have killed you 10 years ago!" he screamed, his face a mask of rage. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the roar of the fire. Faint at first, then louder, clearer. Dong, dong, dong. The church bell, ringing in the middle of the night. An alarm, a call to arms. Jebediah froze. His men froze. They looked toward the town. Lights were appearing in windows. Doors were opening. The bell kept ringing, a frantic, insistent peal that shattered the night. And then, another sound. A woman's voice, amplified by the strange acoustics of the valley at night, clear and strong. She was standing on the church steps, the ledger open in her hands, reading names, reading crimes, reading the truth. "He's reading the list," one of the men yelled in panic. "The whole town will know." Jebediah looked from the town, now buzzing like an angry hornet's nest, to his brother lying helpless beneath him. And at that moment, a carriage pulled up, pulled by 2 black horses. Hiram Richter stepped out, his face pale and furious. "Finish him!" Richter shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Abel. "Finish him and get that book!" Jebediah looked at Richter, the man he had sold his soul to. He saw the naked fear and cruelty in his eyes. Then he looked down at his brother, who stared back, not with hatred, but with a deep, weary sorrow. The townspeople were coming, a wave of angry, shouting figures, carrying lanterns and pitchforks, their fear finally burned away by the truth. Jebediah made his choice. He stood up and offered a hand to Abel. "Sorry, brother," he grunted, pulling him to his feet. Richter's face contorted in disbelief. "What are you doing? I own you." Jebediah turned to face his former master, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brother. "No," he said, a faint, bitter smile on his lips. "You just rented me." The crowd descended. They swarmed past the 2 brothers, their faces set with a decade's worth of repressed anger. They surrounded Richter, who shrieked and pleaded, but his reign was over. The poison had been cut out. As the sun rose, its clean light fell on the smoldering ruins of the shack. It fell on the town, which was forever changed. It fell on Abel and Jebediah, brothers again, bruised and broken but standing together. And it fell on Alara and Leo, holding the book that had saved them all. Abel walked toward them, his long shadow stretching out before him. He knelt down in front of Leo. "You were brave," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Leo looked up at the man who had been a giant, a protector, a ghost named Cain, and a hero named Abel. He threw his arms around his neck. "Are we safe now?" Abel looked at Alara over the boy's head, and for the first time, his smile reached his storm-gray eyes. "Yeah," he said. "We're safe." Justice doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it starts with a whisper, with a small boy's desperate plea, and a good person's choice to stand and fight when no one else will. If you believe that one person's courage can change the world, don't forget to like and subscribe. There are more stories out there just waiting to be told.